is going to join us later will join us later. Okay, so good evening, everybody who joined us. We have made a very small mistake. We're adjusting it now. Chiara will be talking today about Libya, which is actually very good because we've been in the process of discussing Libya recently, and this meeting, this discussion will add to the intrigue of those conversations that we had. And as Anna Kashin has written in the chat, Libya is a very hot topic. Yes, it is a very hot topic. Although from time to time it is being overshadowed by something which is called COVID-19, whatever it is. I'm not going to elaborate on the subject because Chiara is a better specialist in Libya than myself, so she's gonna make our day with additional knowledge. So Chiara, unfortunately, I won't be here to listen to this particular lecture, but I will definitely watch it later on because we are going to record this thing, and of course I will see your presentation. Valery, will you please switch on the recording device from you, because I'm going to switch out of the meeting.
Yes, I have switched it.
You're already recording. Very good, very good. So I wish you an enjoyable couple of hours, and I'm always with you in my mind. Right, thank you. Chiara, please.
Thank you, Andrei. Thank you, everyone, for having me over today. I'm Chiara Lovotti. I am a PhD candidate at the Faculty of History and Cultures of the University of Bologna. My research area is the Middle East and North Africa, and I look especially at the international relations of these countries with the rest of the world. I happen to be also an associate fellow at the Italian Institute of International Political Studies, ISPI. I used to work there full time. Now I'm just a collaborator. I thank for having me over, and I will talk about Libya, and especially about the role that the international players are playing in the conflict. Let me share my screen. And if you prefer to turn your cameras on, but you will not see each other anyways, because I will share a screen. So let me start the presentation. Okay. I hope you can see well. Valery, do you see the screen correctly?
Yeah, everything is all right. Thank you.
Спасибо. Okay. So, this way. Okay. So this is our index for discussion today. I will give very short, brief background information on the Libyan context. Then we will mark some of the most important passages and turning points in the conflict. And then we will dig more in detail on the role that the international community, meaning various non-Libyan actors, have in the conflict. So here it is. This is a very basic picture schema that I made about the main components of the Libyan society. So we have the Libyan system, if we can say this way. So we have democracy, Islam, and rentierism. What is a rentier state? You know it. A rentier state, it's a state which derives all or a substantial part of its national revenues from the rent of oil resources to external countries. And this happens to be the case for Libya. So rentier state is characterized by a relative absence of revenue from domestic taxation, precisely because the fact of having such huge resources, such huge availability of oil and gas resources spares these countries from the trouble of having to taxate people. Inside this system, we have the Libyan Society, and outside this system, we have actors, players that are non-Libyans, but they do have an impact on the tenor of this system. There is a wave of scholarly research, of course, Western scholarly research, which believes that these three elements, democracy, Islam, and rentierism, do not coexist well in the same system. In other words, this wave of scholarly research believes that it is difficult, if not impossible, for a state to be contemporary, rentier, Islamic, and democratic. They make instances, for example, on Tunisia, let's say, which is democratic and Islamic, and it works well, or Lebanon. Lebanon is also democratic, although maybe it's a fragile democracy, but still it is. Then they make the example of countries where that are rentier and Islamic, for instance, countries in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, etc. And they argue that being rentier, Islamic, and democratic is more difficult. I suggest a good book. It's not the purpose of our lecture today to get in detail of this theory. So I suggest a good book entitled "The Rentier State," published in 1987 by Krum-Helm, written by Beblawi and Luciani. Personally, I think this theory is quite poor because it's only grounds evidence only on the fact that states that are both democratic, Islamic, and rentier do not exist, which may be true, but this doesn't necessarily imply that they couldn't exist. Anyways, as I was saying, what is inside this triangle is the Libyan Society. And let's look briefly at that before going to the conflict. So when we talk of the Libyan system or Libyan society, we find three levels of what we could say Libyan identity, if we can. The first is, of course, the national one. Well, this is also a huge topic which we don't have time to delve into, but the formation of a Libyan national identity dates back to ancient times, dates back to the Italian colonization, because during the Ottoman rules, but during the second Ottoman rules, so I'm talking about 1835 to 1911, Libya still is divided into these three main regions, Cyrenaica, Tripolitania, and Fezzan. And at that time, these regions were ruled as three separate provinces. It was only in 1911, when Italian colonizers arrived, that Libya was united into one Libyan nation. It was called by the Italians La Libia Italiana, the Italian Libya. And so they unified these three provinces under one Libyan nation. So in a sense, some scholars say that the identity is a sub-product of Italian colonization, although this is only partially true, because to be honest, at the time of Italian colonization, there was a strong anti-colonial movement, so a strong anti-colonial resistance and movements, anti-colonial movements were created, but they did not lead to the development of a Libyan national movement. So in other words, there was not the idea of Watan nation at that time. So it's more likely that inhabitants of the regions found unity because of this disgregating, crumbling points of reference the years following the fall of the Ottoman institution, the fall of the Ottoman army, the Sultan, the Caliph. All these things disappeared and pushed Libyans together. For the same reason as before, we don't have time to delve into this topic, so I suggest the book that you see here, written by an Italian professor, Anna Baldinetti, The Origins of the Libyan Nation, Colonial Legacy, Exile, and the Emergence of a New Nation State. Because I think the topic of the formation, the origins of Libyan nationalism helps understanding the deep roots of the so many divisions that affect the Libyan scenario. Second level of identity, it's the regional one, of course. We have said this, Libya falls into three main geographical regions, Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, and the Fezzan, and also for very banal, for purely geographical regions, these three areas have traditionally been neighboring countries, and look at the map, it's not difficult to understand what countries. So Cyrenaica has close ties with Egypt from a cultural and also a religious perspective. There is, for instance, a very big community of the Christian Copt Church in Cyrenaica, which was established back in ancient times, in the 1st century, from, if we can say so, a kind of diaspora of people from Egypt. Tripolitania was more linked to traffics in the Mediterranean countries like Italy and Turkey, and the Fezzan was more linked to tribes and dynamics in neighboring African countries. Niger, Chad, the Sahel region in general. And let's also remember that historically Tripolitania and Cyrenaica have run a bit quicker and farther in terms of development. So still today, most of the Libyan oil fields are located in this part of the country, despite recent discoveries over there. So and they are both coastal areas, so they have been more rich and more developed over time. The third level of Libyan identity, very important one, still plays a huge role, is a local one, the tribal one. Libya is inhabited by a huge number of tribes, ethnic tribes. Tribal identity is, of course, more relevant in rural areas, but not only there. And it is important to keep in mind because when the regime of Muammar Gaddafi collapsed in 2011, these localisms, these tribal identities emerged with all their strength. So different groups, different tribes have formed on an ethnic basis, and many of them have also taken weapons. So they have harmed themselves, because, and we will see this with the fall of Gaddafi, an entire security system fall with him, and so many of these tribes had to provide for their own security. So this complex society, and this of course was just an introduction, this complex society was ruled for over 40 years, 42 years, by Muammar Gaddafi. On September 1969, Gaddafi took power with a coup d'etat that overthrew the monarchy of King Idris al-Senussi. He was very young at that time. He was 27, imagine. So I guess somehow in between mine and your age. And he became the guide of the revolution of great socialist peoples, Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. When he enters the Libyan scenario, he quickly becomes the symbol of a new, not only of a new Libyan revolution, but also a new Libyan nationalism, if we can say. He advocates for a Libya to be of the Libyans, so free from any foreign interferences, be these interferences coming from one bloc or another one of the Cold War. Let's not forget, this is the overarching global order in which Gaddafi took power. And so he aims to become a nationalist leader. And let's not also forget that when Gaddafi took power in 1969, we are in the midst of a political and cultural push towards decolonization and nationalist grievances in the region. Let's think of course, of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, which was a model, if not an idol for Gaddafi, but also in other countries, Mao in China, Fidel Castro in Cuba, etc. And indeed, 1 year after Gaddafi took power, in 1970, the Italians are ousted. So the Italians are out of Libya. US and British military bases are closed, and most of the foreign oil companies are nationalized. But Gaddafi rules in an authoritarian way, and this leads towards increasing discontent, while of course discontent grows gradually. The turning point, as you know, is 2011. So let's come to the 2011 slide. Here it is. So these are the origins of the conflict. The purpose of this slide is, of course, not to get into deep details on how the Libyan conflict has emerged, because it would take an entire course to do that, but just for you to fix some of the key passages, some of the key year and turning points of the Libyan conflict. So in February 2011, the first protests break out in Benghazi and soon spread to other Libyan cities between pro-Gaddafi forces and anti-Gaddafi forces, of course. The anti-Gaddafi protest movement, if we can call it this way, was very composite, very heterogeneous. There is no doubt that these protests were driven, anti-Gaddafi protests were driven by internal discontent. In a sense, they were purely, entirely Libyans. But they were also inspired by events unfolding in other Arab countries, especially neighboring Egypt and Tunisia. As you know, 2011 is an historical moment in the entire region of North Africa and the Middle East, when the wave of the Arab uprisings, or so-called Arab Springs, erupt and have catastrophic consequences. I say so-called Arab Springs, of course, because this is also a typically Western definition, the term spring is not really used, neither liked by the Arabs. So a few months into the Libyan uprising, the 20th of October 2011, Gaddafi was captured. He was killed, and rebel fighters took Sirte, which was his hometown. The collapse of Gaddafi's had huge consequences in terms of destabilization of the country. Why? Well, because Gaddafi represented the entire state. He encapsulated the entire functioning of the Libyan system. So once he was gone, the entire state was gone. So you have to imagine like an entire state to be rebuilt from scratch. And this in a country, as we said, that was finding itself in the middle of regional disorder. So a very complex transition begins in 2011. Despite the unstable environment, however, elections are held on the 7th of July 2012 to elect the General National Congress, GNC. These were the first democratic elections in the history of post-Gaddafian Libya. Despite a situation of insecurity and violent protests erupting everywhere, the turnout to the poll was quite high. It was around 60% of Libyans with a capacity to vote. So quite a good result in terms of democracy at that time. The GNC was supposed to elect a prime minister and elect a cabinet and start this democratic transition of the new Libyan. A lot of things happened in between, but another turning point, a crucial one to remember, is the second round of election that was held in June 2014, when the House of Representatives, HOR, was elected. This is a crucial year for the Libyan conflict as we know it today. The turnout in this case was very low. It was around 18%, and this suggests that in the space of just a couple of years, Libyans had lost, I suggest that Libyan in just a couple of years had lost faith on the success of a democratic process. But elections are held, the HOR is elected, and it was supposed to be established in the capital city, so Tripoli, in Tripolitania, so the northwest, as we saw before from the chart. It was supposed to be established there, but it relocates in Tobruk for security reasons, as members of the HOR felt threatened by local militias operating in Tripoli. This move was disapproved by political and military leadership in Tripoli, and so they decided to maintain the General National Congress, which was supposed to disgregate. They maintain it as an entity to keep working in Tripolitania. And so this is really the moment when a first split among two different fronts starts to delineate. In Tripoli, with the establishment of the House of Representatives, the House and a figure that will become very known to everyone, Khalifa Haftar, they start to align positions. Haftar provides security to the House of Representatives, and he eventually he's nominated commander of the Libyan National Army, the LNA. Let's not forget that 2014 is also the crucial year of maximum expansion of the jihadist galaxy. So we have Ansar al-Sharia seizing control of most of Benghazi in July 2014. We have the Islamic State seizing control of the ports of Derna in eastern Libya. So a very complicated turning point here that will shape and will mark the history of the country. And point is 2015, when the UN-backed Skiat agreement is signed in Morocco. This gives new enthusiastic hopes for Libya's unity under the Libyan political agreement, which contains a lot of principles that I will not bore you with, because you can easily find it on Google. So there is new hope for reuniting these two fronts, for uniting Libya and its many factions, but that doesn't really succeed. Another turning point is 2016, and this is the moment when the UN-backed government of National Accord is established, led by the leader that we all know, Fayez al-Sarraj, and this creates further polarization between the West and the East, because since then, Khalifa Haftar, so gradually becoming the leader of the eastern part of the country, the Cyrenaica, opposes the government of General Accord of Tripoli, of Fayez al-Sarraj, in the northwest. Sarraj is a political leader. Haftar is more of a military one, but Haftar, he is able to gain for himself political legitimacy by representing Tobruk Parliament, the HOR, of course, and by presenting himself as the champion of the fight against jihadism and Islamic terrorism. So he gains more and more power. And another turning point, the last turning point for us before going to the role of the international actors was April 2019, when Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army attacks on Tripoli. I would like to show a few maps of what I'm talking about. So this was Libyan political division back in 2017. You see in green the towns and the areas under influence or control of the GNA of Fayez al-Sarraj, and in orange the areas under influence or control of Haftar and the LNA. Let me just open a parenthesis. Of course, it would be absolutely wrong and not precise to reduce the country's problems or to reduce the country's confrontations to these two actors uniquely. Of course, there are a number of other players, a number of other actors in the Libyan ground that are important and that shape the conflict. For instance, the Benghazi Defense Brigade, formally against the GNA, but converge with the GNA on the goal to push out Haftar. A number of militias in Tripolitania, a number of militias in Misrata, the military council of Zintan, and a number of militias in the south political and ethnic fragmentation dominates. We said that before, after Gaddafi's death and the collapse of his system, all these tribalisms, all these localisms emerge, and there is a disruption of the political and tribal order, and this has provoked repeated waves of conflict among tribes like the Tebu, Suleiman, Falla, Tuareg tribes, all involved in a competition in this area, mostly aimed at mostly aimed, but not only at controlling illicit things in the area. So this is more or less the situation as of 2017, and reflects more or less 2018 as well. This is the situation as April 2019. So when Haftar's LNA advances on Tripoli, sparkling clashes with the forces of the internationally recognized GNA. You see, he's always orange, right? Yes. You see, he has gained control of important routes and areas in Tripolitania as well. So he has expanded somehow, and is gaining, of course, control also of oil fields in the region. Then last map, and we come here to the conflict, better the situation on the ground as we know it today. So with Haftar having been ousted from Tripolitania, and the GNA regaining control of this area. Yes, so the GNA here in light purple, and these are the area that remains under control of the HOR and Haftar, and these spots are oil basins. So in a context of evolving and transforming alliances among the various factions, in my view, at least, it is very difficult that one single faction, one single side of this conflict might have the military power to win, given for granted the fact that they have political will to do so, to unify Libya under their rule. So the solution somehow must be a political one. And speaking of political solutions, different interpretation exists on how to address the Libyan crisis. Some point at the fragile Libyan identity, as we were saying before, and ascribe this ungovernability of Libya to this inner fragmentation, to tribalisms, to localisms, to regionalisms. Others think that political polarization between these two fronts is the reason why the situation does not go anywhere. Both these views may be true, but they are partial and incomplete, in the sense that they leave out another important and perhaps relevant, at least nowadays, factor, which is the involvement of international players and the crucial role that they perform in Libya. This is under the sky. Since 2011, the Libyan crisis has moved from being a domestic conflict, a domestic crisis, to being an international conflict. The intervention of external actors in Libyan crisis was driven, of course, by different interests, but we could say by the common desire to direct the outcomes of the Libyan uprising towards outcomes that would best meet each country's own political economic interests. However, interferences of international powers and regional actors complicated the crisis even further and contributed to dividing the country because each external player supported, favored one faction or the other. So either the east of Haftar or the west of Sarraj. But let's see what are these international actors. Are you listening? Everything is okay?
Everything is excellent. Thank you.
Perfect. It just feels a bit weird to talk with a screen. Thank you. A first point should be made about the United Nations. The United Nations have been highly involved in the country since the beginning of the uprising against Gaddafi. Well, of course, actually they were present in Libya even before, with one of the favorite Western instruments when it comes to the East, which are sanctions. So the UN were sanctioning the regime of Gaddafi for his authoritarian rule already when he was there. But they became more active in post-Gaddafian Libya. So on February 2011, the United Nations Security Council adopts Resolution 1917, which we could say marks the official entry of the international community into the Libyan conflict. The resolution is presented at the United Nations Security Council by France, Germany, UK, and the US, but it is approved unanimously. It delineates, it sets non-military intervention guidelines to avoid violent escalations by the regime against civilians. So again, what am I talking about when I say non-military intervention guidelines? Sanctions, arms embargo, and the travel ban for members of Gaddafi's families and his loyals. A few days later, on the 17th of March, the same year, however, Resolution 1973 is adopted, and this is really a game changer. Probably the biggest game changer in Libya's recent history, because it marks the shift from non-military to military action. And in fact, the resolution this time presented by France, UK, and Lebanon states that all measures can be adopted to defend the population from Gaddafi's resistance to the rebellion, which means anything can be done to protect the civilians, including ousting Gaddafi. This is not accepted unanimously because Russia and China, 2 of the 5 permanent members of the UNSC, abstain from voting. Actually, Russia, but you know that better than me since you are Russians, Russia regrets this choice very much, sorry. Regrets the choice of abstaining from voting. Why? because the resolution 1973 formed the legal basis for the military intervention of France, UK, and NATO. So it proved the legal basis, the legal conditions for other countries to intervene in the Libyan revolution. With this resolution 1973, Libya becomes a no-fly zone plus, which means that it was permitted to strike airplanes flying over Libya and also to strike loyal forces on the ground. So basically, in a sense, without resolution 1973, perhaps the history of Libya would have been different. I say perhaps because, of course, we cannot be imagine how things would have gone, but perhaps we would have witnessed a situation like the one of Assad, Syria, a situation where Gaddafi might have fought very hardly to keep power, but eventually he might have stayed in power. So this is really the moment that changed Libya's recent history. And then the United Nations, of course, took other actions later on, including the creation in 2011 of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL, which was supposed to become the primary international body to seek reconciliation between the various revolutionary groups. It was supposed to support future efforts to stabilization, to dialogue, to unity, yes. The United Nations, however, has always supported multilateral efforts. So, and this is the nature of the United Nations, the UN. It's not a state, it's a multilateral organization, so that's its job. However, multilateral efforts of the UN have been during times have been hindered, have been complicated by increasing interventionism of single countries. So many actors, individual actors, in light of the UN initiatives impasse, or more than impasse, probably inability to bring concrete results in the ground. Many actors officially joined the multilateral, so officially said, okay, UN, we are with you, but less officially started to compete with one another over Libya and to adopt their own Libya policies. These actors may be grouped together according to their stance, mostly because their interests vary very much. So a first group of actors is composed by Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia. These players have had, at the beginning of the crisis especially, now things are clarifying, but at the beginning of the crisis, they have had a dual political position, and we will see this is quite a common thing, not only to Egypt, the UAE and Russia. So formally they supported the UN-led negotiations and the GNA and PC, Presidential Council of Serraj, to reconciliation, while actually less formally they have supported have task forces in Tobruk, likely providing him also with the military capacity to sustain his battle. Egypt has obvious strategic reasons to intervene in Libya. We said before already, links between Egypt and Cyrenaica are historical and are very important to Egypt nowadays. More specifically, the Egyptian fight against all Islamist forces, including the Muslim Brotherhood, which Cairo government labels as a terrorist organization, find in Haftar its main ally. Haftar is an enemy of Islamist-leaning forces in Tripoli, so we Egyptians have to support him with all our capabilities. So there is a political and military support to this front, the Cyrenaica front, and there are also security reasons. Egypt is interested to create a sort of buffer zone on the border between Egypt and Cyrenaica to protect its border from any possible return, any possible recrudescence of the Islamic State or other jihadist groups threatening stability in Egypt. The UAE, so for its part, the United Arab Emirates, well, and Saudi Arabia to a lesser extent, are also interested in containing Islamist forces throughout the region. Over the last few years, there have been reports of many Egypt, UAE pro-Haftar operations on the ground. And so they are cooperating somehow, these two countries. In other actors' views, of course, the views of actors supporting the other front, so Siraj and Tripolitania, the ambiguity of these countries, Egypt and the UAE mostly, has led to an imbalance in favor of Haftar, which did not create, they argue, the conditions for successful negotiations. So the more international support Haftar received from these countries, the other faction believes, the farther away the possibility of a negotiation, of a mediation was running. Russia is not because you are from there, but Russia is a very interesting actor in this crisis, and I will dedicate a slide to it. So there is no doubt that Libya is important to Russia in the context of Mediterranean politics, needless to say. As Egypt is important, as Syria is important. However, there is a trend in Western analysis to look at Western analysis, which look at the role that Russia plays in Libya specifically, which is, at least in my view, to overestimate it a bit. Don't get me wrong, Russia does play a role. Russia is a relevant actor, but I don't think that Russia is really the one that has been affecting the course of events in Libya. I'm talking of Libya, of course. And this is so for two main reasons, in my view. The first, historically, Russia is certainly not Libya's main ally. Since the time of Gaddafi, Libyan leadership was quite non-Soviet, despite the fact that Gaddafi was a good buyer of arms from the Soviet Union, but there was not the close friendship, the close relations between Tripoli and Moscow that there was, for instance, between Damascus and Moscow. We said this before. Gaddafi rather wanted a Libya free from foreign interferences, and he preferred to ally neither with the Soviets nor with the United States. So there was not a love relation between Tripoli and Moscow, and this absence of a Libyan-Russian deep friendship did not change with Gaddafi disappeared from the stage of Libya. Of all political figures that have succeeded after him, there was no one that was so strongly pro-Russia, so strongly close to Russia as, again, Assad family is, for instance. So this is to say that Russia and Libya might not have had so far the same room for action simply that it has in Syria or in other contexts. The second reason why Westerns might sometimes overestimate Russia's role in Libya today is that I don't believe that Russia has been the one shaping, creating events in Libya. We have said this a few moments ago. Russia in 2011 abstained, for instance, from voting in the 1973 resolution that allowed for French, NATO, UK intervention that threw Gaddafi. We have said this, and we have also said that Russia regretted that choice. And by the way, parentheses, this is also one of the reasons why Russia, on the contrary, took such a more active stance in Syria. Russian officials said this several times. In Syria, we don't want another Libya. Like, let's think it twice before casting a political leader and throwing a country into chaos. So it is not Russia, it is the two Libyan factions that are shaping the conflict. If any, it was the UN. If any, it was Western powers back in 2011. Russia is rather, in my view, seizing opportunities, military opportunities, diplomatic opportunities, opportunities to present itself as a player, an important player in the Mediterranean, but it's not shaping, it's not creating these situations. But when is it that Russia stance changed a little? So for a long time after the oust of Gaddafi, Russia played quite the role of the observer, rather than the game changer of the story. But Russia's policy in Libya changed when Russia's successful policy in Syria changed Russia's position in the Middle East and North Africa in general. Nevertheless, in Libya, Russia's approach was always very cautious. So there is an understanding of the importance of Libya in the context of the Mediterranean, yes. There is a desire to show that Russia counts in the story, yes. But Russia was initially very cautious, and this meant that it kept dialogue open with all sides. The as I wrote here, the talk to everyone approach. The talk to everyone approach is a good one, although it had one side effect, in my opinion, which is that it was not very much appreciated by the West. coming myself from think tank and policy making, policy analysis world, I remember this narrative back a couple of years ago when Russia started to become more active in Libya. I remember these discourses about how worried we should be about Russia playing the dirty game with everyone, and how we should contain these Russian threats, allow me to say. And so for this reason, which was a stupid thing in my view, a EU-Russian dialogue over Libya was never sought. The EU never opened up to tried theoretically, but never really tried to establish a dialogue with Russia over Libya, as it is not doing so over Syria, for instance. And then one last point that you should remember when you deal with Russian foreign policy in Libya is that it is a bit divided into the foreign ministry and the Ministry of Defense. So this talk to everyone approach is rather the interest and the view of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Your minister, Sergei Lavrov, specifically, a brilliant diplomat, was trying to go for this way, while the talk to everyone approach was perhaps not exactly the main interest of the Ministry of Defense, who was more interested in talking with the eastern part of the country. By the way, it's not published yet, but it will be published by the end of November. A very good piece of your professor, Andrei Sutrigin, on the last report of the РСМД, Российский Совет по международным делам, on specifically on the Russian role in the Libyan conflict. So it will be out and it will be in the website, I think, of the РСМД somewhere by the end of the month or early December. So another group of countries consists of Qatar and Turkey. And Sudan to a lesser extent, actually. These countries have supported the governments, various governments, succeeding governments in Tripoli, and they decided to turn their weight around the revolutionary forces in Libya, many of them possessing Islamist-leaning political agendas. In particular, they support the forces under the Libyan Dawn coalition, and of course, the government in Tobruk and Haftar have accused these forces of being linked to the radical Islamist galaxy, even accused them of being linked to groups like Sharia, Al-Qaeda, and so they clearly don't love each other. A further intent was reached between Qatar, Turkey, and Tripoli very recently, this August, if I'm not wrong. Yes, it's written here, August 2020, which was a military agreement between the three countries to provide mutual assistance, but this was very bad regarded by the international community as the ultimate effort to compromise stabilization. Now, more interesting, I think, it's a focus on Turkey's role in the Libyan conflict. So with the outbreak of the Libyan crisis, Turkey remains supportive of the UN-recognized government in Tripoli, the GNA, against Haftar. Relations between Haftar and Ankara have always been very tense. Turkish officials have accused Haftar to be a threat to Libya's stabilization, and Haftar has also had a very strong anti-Turk stance. However, despite its political preferences were always been very clear, Ankara did not intervene in the conflict until the 2019 campaign that after led to expand control over the West. We saw the map before. Why I waited so long and why 2019? So 2019 was not only the year the Libyan crisis escalated, but it was also the year when, at the beginning of 2019, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, and Italy established the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, EastMed Gas Forum, a project to jointly develop hydrocarbons in the Eastern Mediterranean. And of course, and this project, would also include Egypt and Cyprus, while completely excluding Turkey. And of course, Turkey was not very happy about this EastMed idea, especially as it came in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is a region of extreme importance to Ankara. This also would need an entire extra lecture, but you know, it's water around Cyprus are contested between Cyprus and Greece since a lot of time, and Ankara since years. Ankara, which is the only international actors recognizing the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, asks for a shared management of gas resources in these waters between Cyprus and Greece, while Greece claims full control over them. Despite Greek position, Erdogan, however, the Turkish president, repeatedly made exploration in these waters, of course, causing the rage of Athens, of Nicosia, and also of other foreign companies operating in the area. So the EastMed, the European Cyprus-Egyptian EastMed project was seen by Erdogan as a threat, if not as an offense. And Libya somehow offered a good occasion to Turkey to try to rebalance equilibria in the area. So that's why Ankara decided to step in, and it had quite an easy game to do that, not only because of ties with historical existing ties with Tripoli, but also because of substantial inaction of European and Western powers. So in November 2019, Turkey said that it had signed an agreement with Libya's GNA on maritime boundaries in the Mediterranean Sea, the so-called Libyan-Turkey Maritime Agreement, to establish an exclusive economic zone, EEZ, you see here in the map. What is EEZ? An EEZ, according to the law of the sea, as prescribed by the United Nations, is a zone over which a sovereign state has special rights regarding the exploration and use of maritime resources, including gas resources present in these waters. This zone, you can see in the map, goes from the southwestern coasts of Turkey to northeastern coasts of Libya. And this would create two vast contiguous blocks of in the Eastern Mediterranean with a joint maritime border. So you see it here. This will become a joint maritime border between Turkey and Libya. This is the first agreement ever signed on a common Mediterranean waters between Libya and Turkey. And of course, this is a reason of deep preoccupation for other countries in the area, because it adds a new huge dynamic to the already tense situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. And in fact, the Libyan-Turkey Maritime Agreement was contested basically by everyone, by the European Union, which said that the agreement infringes upon the sovereign rights of third states, does not comply with the law of the sea. And it was contested, of course, also by Cyprus and Egypt, which even labeled the agreement as illegal. So this is the main interest of which lays behind Turkish intervention in Libya, although there are, of course, also military interests. In December the same year, 2019, Turkey and Libya signed a military cooperation agreement, reinforcing military cooperation in terms of weapons providing, equipment, exchange of technical knowledge, etc. So these are briefly the main interests of Libya in Turkey, and it is clear that in such an unfavorable regional context that Turkey perceives as very hostile, Turkey seeks the support of a partner, and found in Serraj GNA a good one, because he needs support, political and military, and Turkey is willing to give him this support. There is, but I only mention this because it's a huge topic, there is probably also a political or even ideological interests of Turkey, Turkish actions in Libya, but in terms, of course, of supporting Islamist-leaning forces and the Muslim Brotherhood forces, which are in Tripoli. But this is a very underestimated subject, which I leave it open to further investigation in your own. There is another group of actors of lesser importance in the Libyan context, which are Libya's western neighbors, and particularly Tunisia and Algeria. Tunisia and Algeria have showed reluctance in intervening in many instances, but willingness always to take part in the political process towards stabilization. The main interests of these countries are those of countering internal radicalizations processes in their countries, and improving their border control with Libya. Also, keep in mind that these borders are very porous, are very porous, easy to be crossed by traffics of any kind. So Tunisia, certainly not the game changer of the Libyan conflict, but it has been quite an important hub for politics and diplomacy, especially. Tunisia lacks the geopolitical prominence, the relevance to provoke any deep change in Libya, and I don't think it even wants to do that. but it has been very active over the last few years in organizing, hosting summits, conferences. It has hosted also the staff of many embassies that, due to security reasons, have relocated from Libya to Tunis. Among the most important summits, if you want to take a look also on your own, was the Tunis summit in February 2017, which also involved Algeria and Egypt. Then briefly on Algeria, in the immediate aftermath of the Libyan revolution, so 2011, Algeria was focused on countering two main threats. The first was the presence of Hakim, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, so the Maghreb branch of Al-Qaeda. And the second, the threat of increasing agitation from, we saw them before in the map, the tribes from the south of Libya, so Tuareg tribes living in the border across Libya, Algeria and Mali. Why agitation? Because the Tuareg were heavily recruited before by Gaddafi into his Islamic Legion, and when Gaddafi fell, so following the revolution, many well-trained, armed and well-experienced Tuareg fighters returned home in these bordering regions between Libya, Mali, and Algeria, and fear spread that they could provoke nationalist sentiment and push for independence. So this is a hot topic for Algeria, and containing this threat is its main focus. So Tunisia and Algeria, let's say, are more interested in their internal affairs and own security than in meddling into the Libyan conflict. Last point, but quite a big one, it's the role of Western countries. So very briefly, also because I'm speaking too much, I'm talking too much, the US, the United States. So under the Obama administration, at the time of the 2011 revolution, the US approach was rather one, it came famously known as the leading from behind approach, which was basically, let's leave the UN act. We direct games from Washington, but let others get their hands dirty. Why? That for many reasons, mostly because Obama, former president of the United States, Barack Obama, was trying to keep faith to his electoral campaigns, promises that went in the direction of getting the United States out of the messy and dirty wars of the Middle East. In a sense, the memories of Afghanistan, Iraq, 2003 were still vivid in American mindset, and that was the path ever since. Actually, it was only just replicated by Donald Trump. So the United States over the last few years rather focused on its engagement on counterterrorism. They conducted airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Libya beginning in 2015, which contributed to putting out the Islamic States of its Libyan strongholds. Let's not forget, the United States have been the country leading the huge 62 countries international coalition against Daesh, Arabic name of the Islamic State, but they preferred to distance themselves from the volatile situation in Libya. It was too risky, and the prospects to gain good results were too little. Basically, it didn't worth it. And even statements by the outgoing President Donald Trump, who knows, President Donald Trump declared a few times that Libya is not a political priority of his administration. And this, of course, nurtured, it fed, always fashioned narratives of the void, this famous void that the US might have left in Libya, and which others, namely Turkey, Russia, Egypt, might have wanted to fill in. A narrative which personally I don't like that much. Europe, the other main Western player in the Libyan crisis, although Europe doesn't really mean anything. For a long time, it was not possible to talk. It's still not possible to talk of a European policy, of a policy of the European Union in Libya. So there is no unity in Brussels on the Libyan dossier. Rather, we can talk of European policies about Libya. And among these, the countries that have played a bigger role are France and Italy for sure. France. Very briefly, France contributed to the fall of Gaddafi in 2011, one of the main contributors, we said that. Also because at that time, France in 2011 was in a very difficult position. When the Arab Springs, so-called Springs, erupted in North Africa, France was watching with preoccupation. Paris had good ties with both Ben Ali in Tunisia and Mubarak in Egypt. So they looked with preoccupation. At the same time, they understood that they wanted to ride the wave, leave a mark in this region, and somewhat support these revolutions. The French Republic itself was born out of a revolutionary push, so why not to support the revolution of Gaddafi as well? And so they intervened, but they probably expected the revolution to be a quicker thing. They, the French, alongside the British, but they were wrong, because the revolution took several months, from February to October, and as an anecdote on how French might have miscalculated the Libyan revolution, at some point during when French was bombing Libya, they finished the bombs. So they ran out of bombs, and NATO had, in the US, had to go in support of France. So France expected things to be different. There might have been a misperception of how complicated the crisis was and what huge consequences the ousting of Gaddafi might have had. After that, having supported, of course, UN efforts, UN initiative, and having supported the fall of Gaddafi, they have supported formally the UN side of the story. But In 2015, so we go to 2015, Haftar is rising, and those are the years when French is suffering those terrible, horrible attacks. The Charlie Hebdo headquarters, journal, sorry, the Bataclan, all the attacks that we know, and they rather prefer to support Haftar for his presenting himself as the champion of the fight against terrorism. So also France, that's not a prerogative of regional players. Also France has a dual position in Libya. On one side, Paris kept supporting the actions of Western powers and the UN, the UNSMIL mission. On the other, it provided Haftar with military technical intelligence support. And it was not very transparent on that. I don't know if you remember that episode when in July 2016, under President Hollande, that time a helicopter of the French secret services was shut down, fall down in Cyrenaica region during a pro-Haftar intelligence operation, killing three persons of the military intelligence personnel of France. And that was the moment the world knew that France was on Haftar's side. And since that moment, France found it particularly difficult to rebalance its position on the Libyan crisis, and so its position is a bit stalled. In 2017, when President Macron was elected to the presidency of France, he tried to adjust things a bit. A summit was held in Paris, and he called both Haftar and Serraj and obliged them to sign a paper which promised they would make peace. And of course, when they got home, when Haftar and Serraj got home, they didn't make peace. This agreement, this signature did not have any consequence on the ground. But yes, the role of France is perceived very often by the European Union, by Italy, as a bit problematic. Italy, the other actor, has a different position. Italy has strongly and always only supported the GNA of Serraj. Rome invested political capital, both officially and unofficially, by hosting summits, carrying on intense diplomatic activity, and trying to bypass the conflict between Tobruk and Tripoli by sometimes, very often, by directly addressing municipal local actors, representatives, members of civil society, tribal leaders, etc. What's Rome's main goal? Supporting Serraj by improving security conditions, especially in Tripoli. Why does Rome follow this line so strongly? Two main reasons. The first, it's due to Italy's political, economic, commercial, and energy huge interests in Libya, as shown by the recent investment, by frequent investment of our giant of the energy, Eni, the Eni Group oil company. And these interests are concentrated in Tripolitania. Second reason, Libya's coasts are the main departure point, you know it, for migrants to arrive on our soil. Italy must maintain good relations with those in control of this part of the country, with Tripolitania. You know, the migration issue is a huge element of disgregation, of opposition, of fight in the Italian politics. So really one of the most important interests for Rome in keeping this collaboration alive. Although it should be said, Italy performed quite well during until the Gentiloni governments in 2016. It was Italians that physically drove Serraj in Tripoli when he had to establish there. In 2016, we established the Missione Ippocrate mission, which was about the establishment of a military hospital to support people in Misrata that are fighting against ISIS. But when Haftar grew stronger, also Italy had, but I mean, this is not a nasty thing by itself. Also Italy started to open up to him. The point is that this also Italian dual position compromised a little its Libyan policy. I remember, for instance, when there was the 2000, when we ran the conference in Palermo in 2018, there was not a clear stance on what that conference was about. I was not working at the conference on Palermo, of course, but I had contacts with some diplomats, and I remember there were the purpose of the conference itself was not very clear. Okay, it was about shaking hands, as all conferences, bringing two actors together to talk, but there was no clear strategy, no real design behind that. Plus, we ended up pleasing every request of Haftar on when to speak, what to talk about. So we could have played, Italians could have played a strong political role in support of the faction they are supporting, the GNA, but they didn't. So as a consequence, the Italian position became weaker and weaker. And for instance, when Misurata airports were bombed close to our military hospital, when migrants killed in detention camps, we hardly raised our voice. So we have become weaker in our Libyan policy too. And then there is Germany, which took a more active role lately this year. The Berlin Conference was held on 19 January 2020, whose main goal was precisely to gather international actors whose involvement had provoked escalations in Libya. So they gathered Algeria, China, Egypt, the UAE, France, Italy, UK, Congo, Russia, US, Turkey, also countries from the Arab League, the African Union, other European countries. What was the effect, the result of the Berlin Conference? Little, in my view, although it was a good effort, but that's just my humble opinion. As any conference, it remains a conference. Things said, things are decided. Yes, they designed a roadmap in Berlin, and they are trying to follow it. They do. They are also discussing the Berlin conferences, follow-ups these days in Tunis. But then who shapes the destiny of a war is still the actors on the ground. So for instance, these days a decision could be made if international actors have to leave, those with a boot on the ground have to leave the boots on the ground, and this decision might be made by international community gathered under the overarching Berlin Conference cartel, but will these actors accept to do that? There remains a question mark. And finally, last point, because before I said the Europe is lacking a unitary vision on Libya, which is true, but here is one effort, the latest European effort to find, to move a common step. I apologize, the map is in Italian, but I didn't have time to translate it, but it's quite easy anyways. So this mission Irini was launched in March 2020, and it's supposed to last until March 2021. So 1 year. The purpose is to apply arms embargo that the UN has imposed on Libya. On Libya. So again, in green, the areas under control of GNA, in orange, the areas under control of the LNA, in light blue, the area where the Operation Irini, which means peace in Greek, by the way, should operate. So what are its main tasks? Investigate and adopt and do inspections on the boats in the Libyan coastal water, which are marked here in darker blue. There are boats that are suspected to be trafficking arms, human beings, any illicit materials. 2, investigating and collect information on illicit exports of oil from Libya. 3, training the coastal guard and the Libyan marine forces. And finally, countering the traffic of human beings. Irini will be guided by an Italian army officer, Fabio Agostini, and its headquarters are based in Rome. So to sum it up, what I wanted to show in conclusion, this brief roundup wants to show that the Libyan crisis has clearly grown beyond the boundaries of a domestic conflict. It's no longer a domestic dispute among factions, Libyan factions, political factions, tribes. It's really an international conflict. And as a result, although situations on the Libyan ground as complicated. What does this mean for Libya? It means that the solution of the crisis might be far and might be more complicated to reach as the number of stakeholders has increased. And I would stop here, apologizing for running so long. And if you have comments or questions, that would be welcome.
Thank you, Chiara. I managed to come back to see the conclusion of your presentation. Well, regarding questions, of course there are a few, but I don't know whether we are in a position to sort of plunge into the discussion of all of them. First of all, I'd once again thank you very much, and I wanted to tell you that don't beat yourself very hard about the passive role of Italy in the crisis. Everybody who took a role in this crisis didn't do very good. I mean, not only Italy, including the internal actors. Just take two of them. Haftar, who doesn't know where to find his own head, and Sarraj, who resigns today and comes back tomorrow. So A lot of people don't know what to do about it. What caught my eye is is the description of the American position about Libya. I mean, we've talked with you before that on a different track. I mean, what changed your position? America, who was a leader of 62 countries of the coalition fighting somebody in the Syrian desert, out of 62 countries, how many participated in the coalition? In fact, I mean, it's a public relations stunt. 62 countries of the coalition working in Syria. Same in Libya, as a matter of fact. As far as I understand, the United States disengaged in Libya not of any practical vision, but out of fear to share the blame. I mean, it's a practical distancing themselves from the Libyan blame, which is which runs very deep. So it's, I mean, you're right here that Libyan crisis is an international crisis, but Libyan crisis is also a catalyst. Libyan crisis is something which plays the role of the magnifying glass through which we can ascertain the practical sides of politics and policies of several major actors, including states. Germany is very standing naked in this thing. Russia and the rest of them. So that's actually not so much as a question as a comment. But I see there are questions here actually, Chiara. I think so. Yeah, we have in the chat. Yes. Oh, that's an eternal question, or $1 million question. If any political talks can really solve the problem when Libya's alliances are weak and fragile. Yeah. Are there any defined sides to take the responsibilities? And the second question is permitted, could Egypt, supported by US, for example, balance the Turkish influence? Wow. That's two very interesting questions. Are you ready, Chiara?
I don't know if I am. Well, thank you, Anna. It's always Anna, right? Yes. I'm not sure what you mean by political talks. I said if you mean political talks at the international level, I said this before. No, I don't. I don't think any. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, but
you are not the only one.
Talks do not change wars. How many conferences, how many summits did we have in Italy, France, Germany, other countries about how many times have those two guys met and shake hands, and nothing has really changed. And I say this now, I do coming out. I say this having organized for 5 editions the Rome Mediterranean Dialogues Conference, which was perhaps one of the biggest initiatives of the Italian Foreign Ministry. It's not about solving the Libyan crisis, of course. It's a forum of dialogue to gather representatives of the Arab world, and we did have representatives of Libya as well. We had MITIG, and then we had the UN envoys. As a former organizer of talks and conferences, I don't believe they do have much potential to influence. No, my point actually was to give a brief roundup of how complicated is the situation at the international level, but by stressing that those who can solve the Libyan nightmare are mostly the Libyans, in my view, with help of whoever they want. But as any crisis, it seems to me, at the end of the day, this solution is internal. I don't know if Professor Chupigin agrees with that. And also, I didn't understand in what sense should I have changed my mind about the US.
Forget about US. It was just a running commentary because the US, they distanced themselves from the Libyan crisis, not from any practical considerations, as because they were very keen to avoid or sidestep the blame which started hitting the fan quite clearly. And that characterizes the United States from a not very good position, I should say. There is, from Anna, another question, which is said, second question is, could Egypt, supported by US, for example, balance the Turkish influence? That's a, as I said, that's a very provocative question, because personally, I don't know, Chiara, your position, but I don't see US supporting Egypt against Turkey.
No, I don't think, I mean, if this happened, I might have missed that. I don't think it could be the case either, but this is a very good question, good point concerning the role of Turkey specifically, because I think it's, well, I don't like the definition game changer, but I think it is the country with more potential to mess around the Libyan situation, if I may. Turkey, Egypt, they support two different fronts. I don't know, but it seems to me Turkey may be a bit stronger, perhaps, than Egypt. Maybe.
Well,
Turkey's position. Yeah, not.
It depends, Chiara. It depends. Turkey militarily is probably stronger than Egypt, but Turkey is farther away from Libya, so the logistical outreach is more difficult.
That's absolutely sure. Yeah,
so it sort of levels the ground, but I don't think that they are going to engage there directly. Nobody wants that. I mean, and America, US, I'm very doubtful that United States is going to support either one of them against the other, because both of them are quite occupying a key position in American Middle Eastern policy. They will not sacrifice a relationship with one of them in favor of the other. So it's a very difficult balancing act the Americans are playing. I don't know what is going to happen because of this. Now we have Valery Matrosov, who thanks you a lot. And he has a little question. Is there anything interesting about Sudan, especially when the agreement with the Darfur tribal authorities was signed, which could be used as a sort of example of consensus for some parts of Libya? Yes, he first put it in my private chat and then.
Well, about Sudan, I avoided talking about Sudan because I'm not that much of an expert formally. Is aligned more with position of Qatar and Turkey. So supporting the Western side of the story. but I skipped that because I don't have a clear opinion on Sudan, but I can make one and get in if I don't know how to reach your contact, but maybe Andrea can give it to me, and we can discuss that more deeply if
I warn you, Valery now is very deep into Sudan affairs. So
I see.
Trouble, yeah?
I can see it from the question. That's why I don't want to answer, because I would make this up.
Of course, I will put you in touch with him. But Valery, I want to say, while we are still here, that I wouldn't be so positive about the agreement with Darfur tribal authorities. And I wouldn't take that into consideration at all, speaking frankly, because any agreement with tribal authorities, I stress it, tribal authorities, doesn't worth shit. I'm sorry for my French. Because those people, they will sign anything if you offer something, and then they're not going to keep to the agreement, never ever. So you can go back to Kipling in this respect. He was a specialist in tribal words and tribal agreements.
Okay, to the rhymes of Mumba Yumba.
Mumba Yumba.
Exactly.
Bablava and Luciani on Ritier States. Chiara, is it published in English? I never saw that.
Yeah, it's in English. Beblau, I think it's an Arab. Luciani is an Italian. He's a good one.
Luciani, I understand that he's Italian. The book is in English.
No, the Re-entry State. It's published by Routledge. Wait, I have to check, but no. Krum Helm.
No, Valery will find that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Should be the publishing house.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, then once again, Chiara, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was, as usual, quite engaging, and we will meet very soon. Okay.
Very soon, the 27th, right?
Yeah, and then I will talk to you privately tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
We have to discuss some topics of your research. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you. Спасибо всем.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Chiara.
До встречи. Пока.
Take care. Пока.
Thank you. Спасибо.